That cold morning, no one expected an act of kindness to change everything. What started as another day on the road became a story the whole town tried to explain, and few had the courage to tell. Before we begin, subscribe and turn on the bell. Here, we show that behind the engines and the leather, there are still human hearts. The snow fell in heavy, reluctant flakes, blanketing the outskirts of Willow Creek like a shroud no one wanted to lift. It was the kind of winter that seeped into your bones, turning the air sharp enough to cut. Jack Harlan gripped the handlebars of his old Harley, the engine's low rumble the only sound cutting through the muffled world. He was a single dad, though you'd never guess it from the faded Iron Hawks patch on his leather vest, the one that marked him as part of a brotherhood most folks in town crossed the street to avoid. His daughter, Ellie, was back at their cramped apartment, bundled up with a babysitter who charged by the hour. Jack had promised her pancakes when he got home, the kind with too much syrup, but the road had other plans. He'd stopped at the edge of town, near the old gas station where the pumps stood like forgotten sentinels under a flickering neon sign. The place was a relic, pumps rusted at the edges, the air thick with the scent of stale coffee and motor oil that lingered even in the cold. Jack needed to check his tires. The snow was piling up, and the last thing he wanted was to slide off the blacktop with Ellie's school pickup looming tomorrow. He killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing in like an unwelcome guest. His boots crunched on the thin layer of ice as he dismounted, breath fogging in front of him. Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. The clerk, a wiry man named Pete with grease-stained fingers, nodded without looking up from his crossword. Jack grabbed a thermos of black coffee, bitter and scalding, and paid with crumpled bills from his pocket. That's when he heard it, a muffled shout from outside, carried on the wind like a warning. He paused, hand on the door, the cold seeping back in as he pushed it open. There, in the parking lot, under the weak glow of a single street lamp, stood a cluster of figures. 3 men, locals by the look of their flannel jackets and work boots, had cornered someone against the side of a beat-up pickup. The victim was on the ground now, scrambling back through the snow, his coat dusted white. Jack's stomach tightened. The man on the ground was older, maybe in his 60s, with a thick white beard and a red flannel shirt that hung loose on his frame. He clutched a worn Santa hat in one hand, the kind you'd see at the holiday fairs, and his eyes, wide and startled, locked onto Jack's for a split second. "Stay down, old-timer," one of the men snarled, his voice low but edged with something meaner than the weather. He was the biggest of them, broad-shouldered with a shaved head and a scar running down his cheek. The other 2 laughed, a short barking sound that echoed off the pumps. They were the type who hung around the bars on the edge of town, nursing grudges and cheap beer, always looking for a fight to make themselves feel tall. You think you can just waltz in here playing dress-up? This ain't your charity run. The older man coughed, snowflakes catching in his beard like tiny stars. "I was just delivering meals for the shelter. Please, I don't want trouble." His voice was steady, but Jack saw the tremor in his hands as he pushed himself up on one elbow. The snow around him was churned into slush, dark stains blooming where his knees had hit. One of the men stepped forward and shoved him back down with his boot, not hard enough to break bones, but enough to send a message. The older man grunted, the sound swallowed by the wind. Jack's coffee cup warmed his palm, but the heat didn't reach the chill settling in his chest. He should walk away. Ellie needed him home safe, not tangled in some stranger's mess. The Iron Hawks had a code. Mind your own road unless it crosses yours. But this felt different. The way the man on the ground didn't fight back, the quiet dignity in his slumped shoulders. Jack took a step forward, his boots sinking into the snow. "Hey!" he called out, voice even like gravel under tires. "You boys got a problem. Take it somewhere else." The 3 turned as one, eyes narrowing at the sight of him, leather vest, the hawk emblem glinting faintly under the light. "This ain't your business, biker," the scarred one spat. But there was a flicker of hesitation. Jack's kind had a reputation, earned over years of rumbling through these back roads, but it was the kind that kept most folks at bay. The other two shifted, hands balling into fists, breath visible in angry puffs. Jack set his coffee on the hood of his bike, the steam rising like a ghost. He didn't reach for anything, didn't raise his voice. Just stood there, a shadow in the falling snow, the hum of distant engines from the highway, the only backup he'd need if it came to that. The older man looked up again, surprise mixing with something like gratitude in his eyes. "Son, you don't have to—" But Jack was already moving, slow and deliberate, closing the distance. The scarred man puffed up, stepping between them. "Walk away, freak, or we'll make you." Snow crunched underfoot as Jack stopped a few feet away, his gaze steady. He could feel the weight of his keys in his pocket, the faint ache in his shoulder from a long ride the day before. Ellie's face flashed in his mind, her gap-toothed smile, the way she clung to him after her mother's accident 2 years back. He wasn't here to play hero. He was just a dad trying to get home. But leaving this man in the snow? That sat wrong, heavy as the frost on his beard. The wind picked up, whipping flakes against their faces, and for a moment, everything hung in that brittle silence, the kind that precedes a storm. The scarred man's breath came quicker, strained, his companions glancing at each other. Jack waited, hands loose at his sides, the cold biting deeper. No one moved. Then, from the gas station door, Pete's voice cut through, "Cops are on their way if you don't scatter." A bluff, probably. But it was enough. The three backed off, muttering curses, piling into their truck with tires spinning slush as they peeled away. Jack extended a hand to the older man, who took it with a firm grip, rising unsteadily. Up close, he smelled of pine soap and faint wood smoke, his beard flecked with melting snow. "Thank you," he said softly, voice rough from the fall. "Name's Elias. I volunteer at the holidays, meals for folks down on their luck." Jack nodded, helping him brush off the worst of the snow. "Jack, you all right?" Elias managed a small smile, but his eyes held a weariness that went beyond the shove. They stood there as the snow continued to fall, the neon sign buzzing overhead, engines cooling in the dark. Jack didn't know it yet, but that moment, the push in the snow, the unexpected stand, had cracked open something in the quiet heart of Willow Creek. A kindness, small as a thermos of coffee, that would rumble through the town like thunder on the horizon. The snow had thickened by the time Jack eased Elias into the passenger seat of his truck, the older man's coat still damp and clinging. Jack's Harley was chained to the back, a temporary hitch in his plans, but the roads were turning treacherous, and no one argued with the slide of black ice under tires. Elias leaned back against the worn vinyl, his breathing steady now, but laced with a faint wheeze that spoke of old lungs tested by the cold. Jack fired up the engine, the heater blasting lukewarm air that smelled faintly of fast food wrappers and oil from the glove box. Willow Creek's outskirts blurred past, faded billboards for motels long closed, skeletal trees bowing under the weight of the storm. They didn't talk much at first. Jack navigated the empty roads, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the windshield, clearing arcs of white. Elias's hands rested in his lap, fingers tracing the edge of his Santa hat like it was a talisman. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally, voice low, almost lost in the hum of the heater. "Most folks would have kept walking." Jack glanced over, the dashboard lights casting a soft glow on his stubbled jaw. "Yeah, well, seen enough pushes in my time. Don't sit right." He didn't elaborate. The Ironhawks had pulled him from his own share of snowdrifts, literal and otherwise, after Maria's crash, when the world had tilted and left him holding Ellie alone. The Brotherhood wasn't about glory. It was about showing up when the road got slick. They pulled into the heart of Willow Creek, a one-stoplight town huddled against the Wyoming plains. The main drag was lined with diners glowing like beacons in the storm, neon signs flickering open through frosted windows. Jack aimed for the silver spur, a greasy spoon where the coffee stayed hot and the booths offered a view of the endless white beyond. It was the kind of place where truckers nursed mugs at dawn and locals whispered about strangers over pie. He parked under the awning, the engine ticking as it cooled, and helped Elias inside, one arm steady under the older man's elbow. The bell above the door jingled softly, a sound swallowed by the murmur of voices and the sizzle from the grill. The air was thick with the scent of frying bacon and fresh dough, undercut by the damp wool of winter coats piled on hooks. A waitress named Lena looked up from behind the counter, mid-40s with lines etched around her eyes from too many double shifts and a daughter waiting at home. Her apron was stained with coffee splatters, and she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd seen every flavor of trouble walk through that door. "Jack," she said, nodding as she poured 2 mugs without asking. "Storm's a beast tonight. Who's your friend?" "Elias," Jack replied, guiding the man to a booth by the window. The vinyl creaked under them, cold seeping through from the glass. Elias settled in, rubbing his hands together, the tremor fading but not gone. Lena slid the mugs over, steam curling up like unspoken questions. She lingered a beat, eyes flicking to Elias's beard and hat, then back to Jack. "Heard about the ruckus at the station? Pete's already spinning it like you started a brawl." Her tone was light, but there was an edge, compassion wrapped in caution. In Willow Creek, bikers like Jack were shadows on the margin, judged by patches and rumors rather than the quiet loads they hauled for the food bank or the way they fixed fences for widows without asking for a dime. Jack took a sip, the coffee bitter on his tongue. "Wasn't a brawl. Just some idiots pushing around a guy delivering meals." He glanced at Elias, who was staring into his mug, the reflection of the neon EAT sign dancing in the dark liquid. "You do that often? The Santa thing?" Elias nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around the handle. "Every holiday season. Started after my wife passed. Figured if I couldn't fix the world, I could at least fill some empty plates." His voice carried the weight of miles, pauses heavy with memories. Jack knew that tone. It echoed his own late nights. Ellie asleep in the next room while he stared at the ceiling, the ghost of Maria's laughter filling the silence. Lena leaned against the counter, arms crossed, listening. She was one of the few in town who didn't flinch at the Iron Hawk's rumble through on Fridays, knew about the time they'd pooled cash for her girl's braces after her ex skipped town. "Town's got its share of hard hearts," she said softly, wiping the counter with a rag that had seen better days. "Those 3 at the station? Mill workers, laid off last month. Blame everyone but the bosses. But pushing an old man in the snow? That's not hunger talking. That's just mean." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows and sending a fresh flurry against the glass. A pickup rumbled past, headlights cutting through the dark, and Jack felt the pull of home, Ellie waiting, her small world narrowed to storybooks and the promise of pancakes. But something in Elias's eyes held him, a flicker of shared isolation. The older man looked up, meeting his gaze. "You got family, someone counting on you." Jack's throat tightened, the steam from his mug blurring the edges. "Daughter. Ellie's 7, keeps me straight." He didn't mention the ache, the way her questions about her mom hung in the air like exhaust. Elias nodded, understanding blooming in the silence between them. "Mine was the same. Lost her to the cold years back. Pneumonia in a winter like this makes you want to wrap the world in red flannel, keep the frost out." The door jingled again, admitting a gust of icy air and a figure in a grease-smeared jacket. Tommy, a mechanic from the garage on the edge of town. He was Iron Hawks through and through, though his vest, hung in his locker these days, traded for steady paychecks. Tall and lean, with hands calloused from wrenches and the occasional bar fight, he spotted Jack and slid into the booth opposite. "Heard you played White Knight at the station," Tommy said, voice low, grabbing a menu without sitting fully. His eyes assessed Elias quickly, kindness in the scan, not suspicion. "Those mill rats causing trouble again?" Jack shrugged, the leather of his vest creaking. "Handled." Tommy grunted, ordering eggs from Lena, with a nod that spoke of old debts. He was the one who'd rebuilt Jack's Harley after the accident, no questions, just tools and quiet hours in the garage. In Willow Creek, they were the outcasts who fixed what others broke. The roads, the engines, the fragile trusts that kept a town from unraveling. As the night deepened, the diner emptied, leaving the three of them in a pocket of warmth amid the storm. Elias shared stories of his roots, the families he'd fed on the fringes, single mothers like Lena, veterans nursing ghosts in rundown trailers. Jack listened, the weight of his own hidden scars pressing in, the deployments that left him hollow, the nights he'd ridden out guilt on empty highways. Tommy added fragments, his laughter rare but real, revealing the code beneath the leather. No one rides alone, no one leaves a brother in the snow. The clock above the counter ticked toward midnight, rain mixing with the flakes now, pattering on the asphalt like hesitant applause. Elias stood first, steady on his feet, the Santa hat tucked in his pocket. "You've given me more than a ride tonight," he said to Jack, hand extended. "Reminds me there's still fire under the frost." Jack clasped it, the grip firm, a silent pact forming in the dim light. As they stepped out into the easing storm, engines cooling in the lot, the town slept on, unaware of the threads weaving tighter. Kindness in the cold, loyalty blooming where judgment had taken root. The road ahead stretched dark and uncertain, but for the first time in months, Jack felt the hum of something steadier than solitude. The morning after the storm broke grey and unforgiving over Willow Creek, the kind of dawn where the sun struggled through clouds like a reluctant witness. Jack woke to the faint patter of Ellie's feet on the linoleum, her small voice calling from the kitchen before he could even swing his legs over the bed. The apartment was a narrow shotgun affair on the town's east side, walls thin enough to carry the neighbors' radio static, and the distant whine of semis on the interstate. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the ache in his shoulder a dull reminder of the night's chill, and pulled on a flannel shirt over his faded tee. Ellie was at the table, crayons scattered like fallen leaves, drawing what looked like a bearded man on a motorcycle, red hat askew. "Daddy, is Santa real?" she asked, not looking up, her tongue poking out in concentration. Jack paused, pouring cereal into a bowl, the milk sloshing softly. He thought of Elias's face in the diner's glow, the quiet strength behind the beard. "Sometimes," he said, voice low, "he shows up when you least expect it." She beamed, gap-toothed and trusting, and Jack felt the familiar pull, the weight of being both parent and shield in a world that chewed up the soft parts first. He dropped her at school on his way out, the Harley purring under him as they navigated slushy streets lined with picket fences sagging under residual snow. Willow Creek was stirring, mechanics firing up space heaters in open bays, the air sharp with exhaust and the faint metallic tang of thawing earth. Jack's shift at the garage started early. He was the one who handled the custom jobs, the bikes that roared in from out of state, their owners seeking solace in chrome and throttle. The Ironhawk's patch stayed tucked away on his vest in the locker, a secret talisman amid the clang of tools and the hiss of welding torches. Tommy was already there when Jack pulled in, wiping grease from his hands on a rag that could double as sandpaper. The garage was a cavern of shadows and half-rebuilt dreams, Harleys suspended on lifts, parts strewn across workbenches like puzzle pieces from a forgotten life. "Morning," Tommy grunted, nodding toward the coffee pot bubbling on a hot plate. His eyes, sharp under heavy brows, flicked to Jack's face. "Sleep all right after playing guardian angel?" There was no mockery in it, just the easy ribbing of brothers who'd shared more than oil changes. Jack shrugged, grabbing a mug, the ceramic warm against his calloused palm. Ellie kept me up with questions about beards and magic. They fell into rhythm, Tommy handing over a torque wrench as Jack tightened a chain, the metallic click echoing in the cool space. Outside, the town awoke in fits, a school bus rumbling past, its yellow bulk cutting through the mist, a delivery truck idling at the feed store, driver sipping from a thermos much like Jack's the night before. Word of the gas station scuffle had spread overnight, carried on the wires of small-town gossip like exhaust on the wind. By mid-morning, it reached the garage in the form of Carl, the postman, who leaned against the doorframe during his rounds, mail pouch slung over one shoulder. He was a fixture in Willow Creek, 50s, paunchy, with a perpetual squint from years squinting at faded addresses. "Heard you tangled with the Mill boys last night," Carl said, voice pitched casual but eyes probing. "Pete's saying you started it," waving that biker attitude around like a red flag. "Folks are whispering, say the Hawks are stirring trouble again, scaring off holiday cheer." Jack's hands stilled on the engine block, the faint vibration of a distant compressor humming in the silence. He felt the judgment settle like frost, the old narrative painting them as outlaws, when all they'd ever done was patch roads and pull trailers for the church drives. Tommy snorted from under a truck, his voice muffled. "Pete wouldn't know cheer if it bit him. Jack stopped a shove, that's all. Elias was just trying to do good." Carl shifted, glancing out at the street where a couple of locals paused their walk, murmuring behind gloved hands. "Good's relative in a place like this. Mills closing for good next month. Jobs gone, families hurting. Those boys you chased off? Their kids go to school with mine. Pushbacks coming from somewhere." He dropped the mail on the counter, bills mostly, the kind that piled up like unspoken debts, and left with a nod that felt more like a warning. The door swung shut, the bell tinkling faintly, leaving the air thicker. Jack exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the garage's chill, and resumed work. But the words lingered, a subtle strain in his shoulders as he torqued the bolt tighter than needed. The Iron Hawks weren't saints. They'd had their runs-ins, bar stools upended in righteous fury, but it was always for the overlooked. The waitress stiffed on tips, the vet drifting on the highways with nowhere to park. Society saw the leather, the rumble, and stopped there, blind to the compassion stitched into every patch. Tommy emerged, wiping his brow, and clapped Jack on the back. "Don't let it burrow. We know our road." Lunch came with a call from Lena at the diner, her voice crackling over the garage phone like static on an old radio. "Elias stopped by this morning, thanked me for the coffee last night, said he's heading out to deliver more meals, but the town's buzzing. Watch your back, Jack. Some folks think bikers bring the storm, not the shelter." She paused, the clink of dishes in the background, her breathing steady but laced with worry. "Ellie, okay?" "She's fine," Jack replied, glancing at the clock. The hands ticking toward pickup time. "Tell Elias to stay warm." Hanging up, he felt the moral tug sharpen, the choice to step in last night replaying in quiet loops, hands trembling faintly as he gripped the phone. Was it kindness or just reflex? The Brotherhood's code whispered in his ear, protect the vulnerable even if it paints you villain. By afternoon, the garage filled with the usual rhythm, a young rider tinkering with his custom seat, stories exchanged in low tones about rides through the Badlands, the wind's howl stripping away pretenses. But beneath it, the judgment hummed, an undercurrent from the town beyond the bay doors, where neon signs flickered over empty lots and rain began to slick the asphalt anew. Jack wiped his hands, the grease dark under his nails, and stepped outside for air. The sky hung low, pregnant with more weather, and in the distance a figure in red flannel trudged along the roadside, Santa hat bobbing against the grey. Elias, undeterred. Jack watched him go, the snowmelt pooling at his boots, a long pause stretching as he weighed the pull of home against the unfinished thread of last night's stand. The engine of a passing truck rumbled, cooling in the damp, and Jack turned back inside, the door creaking shut on the widening rift between perception and truth. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far these stories of courage and loyalty can travel. The afternoon dragged on in Willow Creek like a slow leak from a tire, the grey sky pressing down on the rooftops until the town felt smaller, hemmed in by the thawing slush along the curbs. Jack finished the custom job in the garage, his hands smeared with the residue of rubber and metal, the faint scent of solvent clinging to his skin like regret. He wiped them on his jeans, the fabric rough against his palms, and glanced at the clock, nearly time to fetch Ellie from school. The pull was constant now, a quiet anchor in the churn of the day, but the morning's whispers had left a residue of their own, settling in his chest like damp cold. Tommy was under a lifted Ford in the far bay, the clank of his socket wrench punctuating the hum of a space heater. "You heading out?" he called, voice echoing off the concrete walls. Jack nodded, grabbing his vest from the hook, the leather still carrying the faint chill from the night before. "Ellie's waiting. Keep an ear out if those mill boys circle back." Tommy emerged, face streaked with grease, and gave a short nod. No words needed. The Iron Hawk's bond was like that, forged in silences that spoke louder than engines revving at dawn. Outside, the air had warmed just enough to turn the snow into a slick sheen on the asphalt, puddles reflecting the overcast sky like shattered mirrors. Jack fired up the Harley, the engine's growl low and steady, vibrating through his boots as he eased onto the main drag. The town unfolded in fragments, the feed store's doors swinging open to release the earthy tang of hay and grain. A cluster of women outside the pharmacy murmuring over steaming takeout cups, their glances sliding toward him like oil on water. He kept his eyes forward, the wind tugging at his collar, but he felt the weight of their judgment, the biker, the outsider, the one who'd stirred the pot at the gas station. The school sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building ringed by a chain-link fence that rattled in the breeze. Jack parked in the lot, killing the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the distant shouts of kids spilling out for dismissal. He leaned against the bike, arms crossed, watching the doors. Ellie emerged in a burst of colour, pink coat flapping, backpack bouncing, her face lighting up when she spotted him. She ran over, small boots splashing through shallow puddles, and threw her arms around his waist. "Daddy, we made snowmen in art, but mine melted 'cause I forgot the hat." Her voice was bright, unfiltered, cutting through the grey like a spark. Jack ruffled her hair, the strands soft and damp from recess. "Sounds like a good one anyway. Pancakes tonight?" She nodded vigorously, climbing onto the makeshift seat behind him, her arms wrapping tight around his middle. The ride home was short, the Harley humming through the quiet streets, Ellie's chatter filling the spaces between the wind's low whistle. But as they turned onto their block, a row of weathered duplexes with sagging porches and laundry lines strung like forgotten wires, Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars. Parked across the street was the scarred man's pickup from the night before, engine idling, exhaust curling up in lazy spirals. Ellie didn't notice, humming a tune as they pulled into the driveway. Jack helped her off, his eyes flicking to the truck. The driver, scarred face visible through the fogged window, stared back unblinking before revving the engine and peeling away with a spray of slush. Jack's breath caught, a strained exhale he held until the taillights vanished around the corner. "Inside, kiddo," he said, voice even, guiding her to the door with a hand on her shoulder. The apartment smelled of yesterday's coffee, and the faint, comforting yeast of bread from the neighbor's baking. Ellie dropped her backpack and scampered to the kitchen table, pulling out her drawing of the bearded rider. But Jack lingered by the window, peering through the sheer curtain at the empty street. The encounter replayed in fragments: the shove in the snow, Elias's quiet thanks, the diner's warmth now soured by the morning's gossip. He should call Tommy, get the hawk's eyes on the roads, but Ellie was watching him, her small face tilted in curiosity. "You okay, Daddy? You look like when Mummy's picture makes you sad." Her words hung there, innocent and piercing, and Jack felt his hands tremble faintly as he turned away from the glass. "I'm fine," he murmured, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He busied himself in the kitchen, pulling out flour and eggs, the whisk scraping against the bowl in rhythmic scrapes. Ellie helped, standing on a stool, her laughter bubbling up as batter splattered the counter. But beneath it, the tension coiled, the moral suspense of the day tightening like a chain. Protect his own, or chase the shadows circling closer. The Brotherhood's code echoed: no one hurts those we protect. Yet here, in the heart of his fragile world, the line blurred. As dusk fell, painting the room in soft greys, a knock sounded at the door, sharp, insistent. Jack froze, the spatula hovering, Ellie's eyes widening. He set it down quietly, motioning her behind him, and approached the door, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Through the peephole, he saw Elias, beard dusted with fresh flakes from another delivery run, a paper bag in his gloved hands. Jack opened the door a crack, the cold rushing in like an uninvited breath. "Thought you might need this," Elias said, voice low, holding out the bag. Warm loaves from the shelter's bakery, steam seeping through the paper. His eyes, lined with the day's wear, met Jack's steadily. "Heard the truck was sniffing around. You're not alone in this." Behind him, the street lamps flickered on, casting long shadows that danced with the wind. Jack took the bag, the warmth grounding him, and for a moment, the silence between them carried the weight of unspoken loyalty, the outcast to outcast, the single dad shielding his own while another extended a hand. Ellie peeked out, her face breaking into a grin. "Santa, you brought bread?" Elias chuckled softly, the sound rough but kind, kneeling to her level despite the chill. "Just for good folks who stand up in the snow." He straightened, nodding to Jack, and turned back into the gathering dark, his footsteps fading on the porch. Jack closed the door, the latch clicking like a resolve hardening. The act, small, unasked for, shifted something inside him, a quiet fire igniting amid the fear. As they ate pancakes by the window, rain beginning to patter on the asphalt outside, Jack watched the road, hands steady now, the compassion of the margins weaving tighter around his guarded heart. The tension rose, not in shouts, but in the lengthening shadows, promising that the storm wasn't over, just gathering force. The rain had turned the streets of Willow Creek into a mosaic of shallow rivers by evening, the asphalt gleaming under the sodium glow of street lamps like veins pulsing in the dark. Jack sat at the scarred kitchen table, the remnants of pancakes congealing on plates, Ellie's drawings scattered like fragile maps of innocence. The bread from Elias lay sliced on a board, its yeasty warmth a faint counterpoint to the chill seeping through the window panes. Ellie was in her room now, tucked under quilts, with a flashlight and a book about lost puppies, her breathing even through the thin walls. Jack stared at the rain-slicked glass, the drops tracing erratic paths, mirroring the knot tightening in his gut. He'd locked the door twice after Elias left, the bolt's click echoing like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. The scarred man's truck lingered in his mind's rear view, idling not just on the street, but in the quiet corners of his thoughts. Jack's hands, still faintly sticky from batter, clenched around a mug of cooling tea, herbal, the kind Maria used to brew on nights when the world felt too heavy. He hadn't touched whiskey since the accident, but the urge flickered now, a controlled burn he pushed down with a slow exhale. Protect what matters, the Hawk's code whispered, but what if the shadows reached for Ellie? The moral weight pressed in, heavier than the rain's steady drum. A low rumble cut through the patter, engines multiple, approaching from the direction of the interstate. Jack rose, moving to the window without a sound, his boots soft on the linoleum. Headlights pierced the downpour. 3 bikes pulling up to the curb across the street, their riders dismounting in a fluid hush of leather and rain. Tommy led them, his frame unmistakable, even blurred by water, flanked by 2 others from the Hawks. Rico, broad and silent with a tattooed forearm that spoke of old wars, and Lena's brother Marcos, whose quick hands had patched more than engines over the years. They weren't here for a social call. The way Tommy scanned the shadows said as much. Jack slipped on his vest, the leather damp but familiar, and stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut behind him. The rain soaked him instantly, cold needles pricking his skin, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and exhaust. "Trouble?" he asked, voice low. Joining them under the overhang of a neighbor's sagging awning. Water dripped from the eaves, pooling at their feet. Tommy nodded, wiping rain from his face, his breath coming in measured puffs. "Mill boy's been talking at the bar. Scarface, goes by Vance, spotted you with the kid. Said you're the one who ruined their night playing hero for some fake Santa." His eyes, shadowed under the hood of his jacket, held no judgment, just the steady resolve of a man who'd ridden through worse storms. Rico shifted, his bulk blocking the wind, while Marcos lit a cigarette, the flame flaring briefly before the rain snuffed it. "They're riled, Jack. Layoffs hit hard. They're lashing out, but pushing an old man. That's low even for them." Jack's jaw tightened, the rain tracing rivulets down his neck, chilling the scar on his collarbone from a deployment gone sideways. He thought of Elias's wheeze in the diner, the quiet dignity in his grip, and felt a surge of controlled rage. Not the hot flash of fists, but a deep, simmering protectiveness that mirrored the Brotherhood's core. "Ellie's inside. Can't have this spilling over." The words hung in the damp air, strained breathing the only response at first. Tommy placed a hand on his shoulder, firm, grounding. "We got your road. Hawks don't let it touch family." They talked in fragments then, voices low against the rain's white noise. Plans sketched in nods and glances, eyes on the roads, a quiet word at the garage to mechanics who owed favors. No escalation unless pushed. Rico's voice rumbled soft, sharing a story from last winter when they'd stood watch for a widow's farm after vandals hit, their presence alone enough to turn the tide. It wasn't law, it was loyalty, the kind that bound outcasts tighter than blood. Jack listened, the tension in his chest easing fractionally, but the internal pull warred on. Ride out now. Chase the threat, or stay, shield the light in Ellie's room. His hands trembled faintly at his sides, hidden in the folds of his vest, the compassion for Elias clashing with the fierce guard over his daughter. The engines fired up again, a low chorus that vibrated through the porch boards, the bike's headlights cutting arcs through the sheets of rain as they pulled away. Jack watched them go, the taillights blurring into the night, then turned back inside. The apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing with unspoken what-ifs. He checked on Ellie, her small form curled under the covers, the flashlight casting a warm glow on the ceiling like a makeshift sky. She stirred, murmuring in her sleep, and Jack knelt, brushing a strand from her forehead, his touch light as falling rain. The guilt twisted, for dragging her into this town's undercurrents, for the choices that painted him villain in eyes that never looked deeper. Sleep evaded him that night, the rain relentless outside, drumming on the roof like insistent questions. He paced the living room, the floor cool under his socks, memories surfacing unbidden. Maria's laugh in the kitchen, the way she'd tease him about his road family, understanding the hawks as the net that caught him when the military spit him out hollow. Then Ellie's birth, the tiny weight in his arms that redefined strength, not in battles won, but in quiet survivals. And now Elias, a stranger whose kindness looped back like an echo, forcing Jack to confront the man he'd become. Single dad by day, shadow guardian by night. Dawn crept in grey and sodden, the rain easing to a drizzle that left the world hushed, puddles mirroring the overcast sky. Jack rose early, brewing coffee that filled the air with its bitter comfort, the pot hissing on the stove. Ellie woke with a yawn, rubbing her eyes, oblivious to the night's vigil. "Pancakes again?" she asked, hopeful, and Jack managed to smile. The warmth in her voice a balm against the rising storm. But as he flipped the batter, a knock echoed, firmer than Elias's the night before. Through the peephole, Vance stood alone, soaked and shadowed, hands shoved in his pockets. No truck, no backup, just the scarred face twisted in something between defiance and desperation. Jack's heart rate quickened, breath shallow, but he opened the door, a sliver, chain engaged, the metal link a thin barrier. "What?" he said, voice even, masking the rage coiling low. Vance's eyes flicked past him to the kitchen light, then back. "Heard you're the one who stuck your nose in. That old guy's stirring shit, telling stories at the shelter about bikers saving his ass. Makes us look weak." His words came out clipped, rain dripping from his jacket, the scent of stale beer undercut by the clean bite of the storm. There was no shove this time, no fists, but the threat hung in the space between them, a moral precipice. Fight here, with Ellie feet away, or hold the line with words. Jack's grip on the door tightened, knuckles whitening, the internal conflict raging silent, compassion for a man broken by lost jobs, warring with the unyielding code to protect. "Walk away," he said quietly, the words carrying the weight of engines cooling in the dark, "before it touches what matters." Vance hesitated, breath ragged, then backed off, boots splashing in the puddle as he retreated into the drizzle. Jack closed the door, leaning against it, the wood solid under his palm, heart pounding in the ensuing silence. The day unfolded in fragile normalcy, Ellie to school, Jack to the garage. But the encounter lingered, escalating the tension like oil in an engine on the verge of seas. Tommy met him at the bay, a subtle nod confirming they'd shadowed Vance's retreat. In the quiet hours between jobs, Jack worked on a carburetor, hands steady now but mind racing, the Brotherhood's compassion a steady hum beneath the rage. The rain picked up again, pattering on the tin roof, and in the distance the faint rumble of more bikes, reinforcements unspoken, loyalty rolling in like thunder. Willow Creek's margins closed in, the outcasts' justice brewing not in violence, but in the unbreaking stand against the cold. The garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead like a persistent doubt, casting harsh pools on the oil-stained concrete as Jack torqued the final bolt on a customer's Sportster. The rain had relented to a misty veil by midday, leaving the air heavy with the scent of wet gravel and distant pine from the hills beyond Willow Creek. His hands moved with practiced rhythm, but his mind replayed Vance's scarred face at the door, the man's eyes hollowed by more than just the storm. Desperation etched in the lines around them, a mirror to Jack's own buried fractures. The hawk's rumble from earlier lingered in his ears, a low promise that steadied him, but the internal churn refused to quiet. How far would he go to shield Elias's quiet mission when it risked pulling shadows into Ellie's light? Tommy slid a workbench stool over, wiping his hands on a rag that hung limp from his belt. "Vance was at the mill fence this morning," he said, voice pitched low, barely rising above the whir of a compressor in the next bay. Pacing like a caged dog, muttering about fakers and biker trash ruining the season. Rico overheard from the road, guy's got a chip bigger than his grudge. Tommy's breath came steady, but his fingers drummed the bench, a subtle tick betraying the controlled edge beneath his calm. He was the anchor for the Hawks these days, the one who mediated when tempers flared on long rides. His own past, a dishonorable discharge that still stung like frostbite, fueling a compassion that ran deeper than the leather they wore. Jack set the wrench down, the metallic clink echoing in the brief lull. He felt the strain in his neck, muscles taut from the night's vigil, and rubbed a hand across his jaw, stubble rasping under his palm. Can't let it fester. Ellie's school Christmas play is tomorrow. Last thing I need is those idiots crashing it for payback. The words tasted bitter, laced with the guilt of a father who'd promised normalcy after Maria's loss, only to drag the road's undercurrents home. Outside, a delivery van splashed through a puddle, its tires hissing on the wet asphalt, and Jack caught sight of Carl the postman again, sorting mail under the awning with deliberate slowness, his glances toward the bay doors sharp as shears. The judgment from the town had thickened overnight, whispers turning to sidelong stares that followed Jack like exhaust trails. At lunch, he'd grabbed a sandwich from the feed store. The clerk, a wiry woman named Rita with calloused hands from years baling wire, sliding it over without her usual nod. "Heard Vance is rallying the laid-off crew," she murmured, eyes flicking to the door as if expecting ears. "Says that Santa volunteers are fleecing the shelter for handouts, and you bikers are in on it. Folks are scared, Jack. Job's gone, holidays lean. Don't paint you all as heroes when it looks like trouble." Her voice held no malice, just the weary compassion of someone scraping by, her own son working odd shifts at the diner to cover rent. Jack had nodded, the bread sticking in his throat, the moral suspense coiling tighter. Defend the misunderstood or pull back to protect his own fragile peace. Back at the garage, the afternoon waned under a sky that bruised deeper purple, the mist turning to a fine drizzle that beaded on the windows like unshed tears. Marcos dropped by unannounced, his bike parked discreetly in the alley, rain dripping from the handlebars as he stepped inside. Lena's brother was all quiet intensity, his frame wiry from years of road work, eyes shadowed by the weight of family debts. Shelter called Lena. "Elias didn't show for the afternoon deliveries," he said, leaning against a toolbox, his breathing measured but quickened by the news. "Last seen heading toward the old mill district with a load of hams and pies. Vance's crew hangs there after shifts." The words landed heavy, stirring a flicker of rage in Jack's chest. Not the explosive kind, but a deep, protective burn that made his hands clench around the edge of the workbench, knuckles paling. They moved without fanfare, the three of them, Jack, Tommy, Marcos, straddling their Harleys in the fading light, engines coughing to life with a restrained growl that vibrated through the damp air. The road to the mill district wound through Willow Creek's frayed edges, abandoned lots choked with weeds, chain-link fences rattling in the breeze, the faint glow of neon from a shuttered bar flickering like a dying pulse. Jack led, the wind whipping cold against his face, carrying the metallic tang of the river nearby. His mind raced ahead, fragments of Elias surfacing, the older man's wheeze in the diner, the steady grip of his hand, the way he'd knelt for Ellie without hesitation. What if the push in the snow had been the spark, and now the fire licked too close? The mill loomed at the district's heart, a skeletal giant of rusted silos and boarded windows, its yard a churned sea of mud and snowmelt. They killed the engines at the perimeter, the sudden silence amplifying the distant murmur of voices. Harsh laughs cutting through the drizzle, the thud of boots on gravel. Jack dismounted first, boots sinking into the soft earth, his heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. They crept forward, shadows among the skeletal frames of old machinery, the air thick with the smell of damp rust and cigarette smoke. Around a corner, near a flickering barrel fire, Vance and his two companions huddled, faces illuminated in orange flickers. Their postures aggressive but frayed, shoulders slumped under the weight of empty pockets and emptier futures. And there, backed against a chain-link fence, was Elias, coat torn at the sleeve, Santa hat trampled in the mud, his white beard matted with rain. He held a splintered crate in front of him like a shield, pies smashed at his feet, the sweet scent clashing with the tension. "I brought these for your families," he was saying, voice steady but edged with strain, breath fogging in quick bursts. "No tricks, just food. We've all had winters that bite." Vance sneered, stepping closer, his boot kicking at the debris, but there was a hesitation in his eyes, a crack in the bravado. Jack's blood surged, a controlled fury rising as he signaled Tommy and Marcos to flank. They emerged from the gloom, a wall of leather and quiet resolve, the drizzle pattering on their vests like hesitant applause. Vance spun, face paling under the scar, his companions freezing mid-step. "This ends now," Jack said, voice low and even, the words carrying the rumble of unspoken engines. His hands stayed loose, but inside the conflict raged, rage at the cruelty. Compassion for men pushed to edges, the code demanding balance. Elias's eyes met his, gratitude flashing amid the weariness, and in that pause, the air thickened with the precipice of revelation, the rain on the fence wires singing a somber prelude to truths yet unveiled. Tommy stepped forward, his presence a steady anchor, while Marcos circled wide, eyes scanning for escapes. Vance's breath came ragged, fists balling at his sides, but the fire's glow caught something in Elias's face. A subtle shift, a hand rising to his beard as if to steady it. The moment stretched, heavy with the weight of choices, the Brotherhood's loyalty, a silent justice brewing in the mist-shrouded dark. If this story already has your heart, hit the like button. It helps the story of Jack Harlan reach more people who still believe in humanity. The drizzle hung in the air like suspended breath, turning the mill-yard into a quagmire that sucked at their boots with every step. The barrel fire crackled fitfully, its orange light flickering across Vance's scarred face, etching deeper lines of uncertainty into the rage. Jack stood firm, the rain beading on his leather vest, each drop a cold pinprick against the heat rising in his chest. Elias remained against the fence, the splintered crate slipping from his grasp to thud into the mud, pies reduced to sodden smears underfoot. Tommy and Marcos flanked Jack, their presence a silent bulwark, breath sinking in the heavy quiet, no shouts. Just the patter of water on rusted metal and the distant hum of the river beyond the silos. Vance's eyes darted between them, his companions shifting uneasily, hands half raised as if caught mid-gesture. "This ain't your fight," he growled, voice cracking on the edges, the words more plea than threat. But desperation twisted him forward, a lunge born of cornered pride. He shoved Jack hard, palms slamming into his chest with the force of bottled fury, sending him stumbling back into the churned earth. Jack's boots slid, the mud yielding like betrayal, and he went down on one knee, the cold sludge seeping through his jeans, soaking into skin, already numb from the chill. Pain bloomed sharp in his shoulder, an old wound flaring, but he rose slowly, hands coated in muck, breath coming in controlled huffs that fogged before him. Ellie's face flashed unbidden, her small hands clutching his vest that morning, and the rage tempered into something fiercer, a father's unyielding guard. "Enough," Elias said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade through fog. He stepped forward, unsteady but deliberate, the rain tracing paths down his weathered cheeks. The group froze in that suspended moment, the fires popped the only sound, as Elias reached up with trembling fingers. He grasped the edge of his white beard, thick, matted but now revealed as a careful attachment, a prop from his volunteer guise, and peeled it away in one slow, deliberate motion. The synthetic fibers came free with a soft rip, exposing a jawline shadowed by stubble, a face lined not just by age, but by years of roads untraveled. Grey hair cropped close, eyes the same steely blue as Jack's, staring back from a visage that mirrored his own in ways that stole the air from the yard. Jack's world tilted, the mud forgotten, his breath catching in a ragged pause that echoed the rain's rhythm. "Dad?" The word escaped as a whisper, strained and disbelieving, hands falling limp at his sides. Elias, his father, presumed lost to a desert highway crash a decade ago after the fights that shattered their family and left Jack adrift in the military's grip. The man who'd walked out on Maria's pleas, on a boy too young to understand, only to resurface now, bearded and benevolent, delivering meals to mask the ghosts of his failures. The revelation reframed everything. The shove in the snow, not random cruelty, but a thread pulling back to Jack's own buried grief, the single dad's solitude born from this very absence. Vance blinked, his aggression crumbling into stunned silence, the scar on his cheek twitching as recognition dawned. You're Harlan's old man? The one who—" He trailed off, the fight draining from his posture, shoulders slumping under the weight of the unexpected. His companions exchanged glances, the barrel fire reflecting confusion in their eyes, the moral suspense of the night shattering like ice under tires. Tommy's hand hovered near Jack's arm, a subtle anchor, while Marcos exhaled slowly, the cigarette he'd forgotten forgotten in his pocket. Elias, no, Harlan Sr., met his son's gaze, the lines around his eyes deepening with unspoken apology, a tremor in his now bare chin. "I came back for the holidays," Elias said softly, voice roughened by the rain and regret, folding the beard into his pocket like a discarded mask. "Heard about Maria, about Ellie. Thought I could do some good without dragging up the past. But seeing you stand for a stranger, me, I couldn't stay hidden." His breath hitched, a long pause stretching as water dripped from his brow, the vulnerability raw in the flickering light. Jack felt the world narrow to that face, the man who'd taught him to ride before teaching him to run, now frail against the fence, pies ruined at his feet like symbols of mended intentions. The compassion surged, warring with the old wounds, the deployments that hardened him, the nights Ellie asked for stories of a grandfather she'd never known. Forgiveness wasn't a shout. It was the quiet unclenching of fists, the nod Jack gave, mud-streaked and steady. Vance stepped back, rubbing his neck, the fight's embers cooling in the downpour. "We didn't know. Mills closing, families starving. Thought he was just some do-gooder conning us." His voice faltered, eyes dropping to the ground, the shared margins of their lives, outcasts in Willow Creek's shadow, bridging the gap. No blows fell. Instead, a halting exchange followed, voices low amid the drizzle, offers to help salvage the crates, promises to steer clear, the Brotherhood's code extending like an unspoken hand. Tommy clapped Vance on the shoulder, a gesture heavy with understanding, while Marcos gathered the least damaged pies, the sweet scent rising faintly against the rust. As the group dispersed into the mist-shrouded night, engines rumbling to life one by one, Jack walked Elias to his truck, the older man's arm linked through his, steps synchronized in the slick yard. The rain eased to a whisper, washing the mud from their boots, leaving the air cleansed and heavy with possibility. Back home, Ellie slept on, her drawings of bearded riders now layered with deeper meaning, while Jack sat by the window, the neon from a distant diner flickering like a heartbeat. The town would whisper still, judgments lingering like exhaust, but in the quiet core of Willow Creek, loyalty had woven its threads. Father to son, outcast to outcast, compassion enduring where law fell short. In the engine's cooling hush, a single dad's guarded heart found its second chance, rumbling forward through the forgiving dark. Subscribe for more stories of compassion, justice, and redemption. Thank you for watching the case of They Pushed the Single Dad in the Snow, then Santa removed his beard and everyone froze. See you in the next one.